On the 26th of September 1960, the first televised US presidential debate took place between Richard Milhous Nixon and John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and by the accounts of many, Kennedy won handsomely, because he was handsome. Although that's not strictly true, because apparently if you listened to the debate on the radio, well, you were more likely to think that Nixon won. But that's not strictly true either. In fact, the truth is a little bit more subtle and nuanced. And I hope that you will get some hope as we uncover that truth that, well, style doesn't always win over substance. Or at least it's a far closer call than we may be led to believe. To help us unpack that, we'll access some articles, links in the description, from this article straight into the debate and how people looked on TV. Kennedy looked young, tanned and relaxed. He'd spent the previous weekend studying not only policy positions, but camera angles and which suit colour, blue in this case, would reduce glare. What then about Nixon? Well, Nixon was recovering from the flu and a knee injury, appeared underweight, pale, tired and uncomfortable. His light grey suit blended with the set. Having refused makeup, Nixon had a visible 5 o'clock shadow as he wiped beads of sweat from his brow. And it's been said that wiping the beads of sweat made him look like he was under pressure, and because he was physically uncomfortable, he was standing awkwardly, which could have made him look like anxious or worried. Let's go here, again from the same article. The visually stark contrast convinced viewers that Kennedy won. Listeners on radio thought Nixon prevailed. Surveys later found that 4 million voters made up their minds based on the debates, with 3 of 4 choosing the Democrat. Kennedy would win in November by a razor-thin margin of 49.72% to Nixon's 49.55%. It was TV more than anything else, Kennedy later concluded, that turned the tide. Now, what I've just read is what I've heard before, what I've read before from more than one source, and maybe that's what you've heard and read before. And so I'm not criticising the author of this because it has been repeated so many times that it's become lore, it's become the legend. And yet, maybe it is simply a legend, because it's interesting when people go back and look at the original data, or perhaps what was being said at the time, that some inconsistencies can appear. To help us with that, let's go to this article, Debunking Nixon's Radio Victory in the 1960 Election, reanalyzing the historical record and considering currently unexamined polling data. And from that same article, we'll go to the highlights. The presumed Nixon victory among radio audiences is likely the product of Republican bias in the sample. Newly considered polling data shows that Nixon's gains on the radio were only with Republican listeners. So whilst, again, it was with Republicans, there is little evidence that television worked to the advantage of Kennedy and the disadvantage of Nixon. That's interesting, I think. There's little evidence that television worked to the advantage of Kennedy or the disadvantage of Nixon. The 1960 election should not be read as a triumph of style over substance. So let's go here again from the same article. Voters found Kennedy ahead on substance as well as style. Considering the full historical context of the election, there is little evidence that television worked to the advantage of Kennedy and a disadvantage of Nixon, as I already said, nor even much evidence that Kennedy was considered more attractive. We find no evidence that the first debate was decisive. We find it dubious that the debates overall produced a 2 million vote swing for Kennedy. We find it implausible that the first debate can be linked in any meaningful way to the outcome of the election. We find it more meaningful that Nixon turned a 5-3 Republican disadvantage into a razor-thin contest, that he largely did so using television. During the final 2 weeks of the contest, the 1960 election should not be read as a triumph of style over substance. Correcting the misguided dismissal of substantive argument is crucial work. Scholars can contribute to the broader democratic project. In other words, what they're saying here is that Nixon turned it around. He was behind. There was a disadvantage, and he did it through television. So if his appearance was hampering him, it's unlikely that he would have turned it around to that extent or at all. It should have backfired. The implication being there was something about what he was saying that was making a difference, as well, of course, as what Kennedy was saying. It was almost a tie. Let's then go to this article. What really happened in the JFK-Nixon debate and what it means for Trump-Biden. At the time we're recording this, the first Trump-Biden debate is due. Kind of inspired by that coming up, because I think, again, we've got to practice critical thinking. This article goes as follows. Yes, Nixon perspired under the hot studio lights, but the truth is that few pundits at the time focused their commentaries on the Republican vice president's appearance. In a revealing example of the impermanence of in-the-moment judgments, both candidates were described in the moment as seeming nervous and tentative. So that's what people were saying then. That's what this article is telling us. They were saying then that a lot of people paid no heed to Nixon's appearance. They did note that both candidates seemed nervous and tentative. Some even said Nixon, who was still recovering from treatment at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center for an infected knee, got the better of the confrontation. The conventional wisdom today that first of its kind live debate, which took place in a Chicago TV studio without an audience, doesn't square at all with the prevailing view at the time, which was that the debate settled nothing about the 1960 race. So the conventional wisdom today, this first of a kind debate, the conventional wisdom being that Kennedy won, and some say won by quite a margin because of the consensus, what people were saying at the time. He was so much better on TV, but that's not what they were saying at the time. And again, as we can see from the other article, the radio vote swing is not exactly a myth, but nothing like as important as was made out, because people were focused on the substance. And then if we go on, we'll see here that the author of this article says, I examined scores of newspaper articles, editorials, and commentaries written in the debate's immediate aftermath for Getting It Wrong, my 2017 book about media-driven myths. There was, I found, no unanimity among newspaper columnists and editorial writers about Nixon's appearance. Not all of them thought Nixon's performance was dreadful or that Kennedy was all that appealing. The Washington Post declared in an editorial 2 days after the debate, of the two performances, Mr. Nixon's was probably the smoother. He's an accomplished debater with a professional polish, and he managed to convey a slightly patronising air of a master instructing a pupil, which maybe wasn't a good idea, maybe it was. And he certainly doesn't seem to have been on the back foot, even though he had a sore knee. The debate moderator, Howard K. Smith of ABC News, later was quoted as saying he thought Nixon was marginally better. So let's go on then, again from the same article. I try and tease out, if Nixon wasn't hampered by appearance and he seemed to be the smoother debater, how come Kennedy, albeit by a small margin, ultimately won? Well, this is, again, from the article, but it's really about President or I should say at that point, Senator Kennedy, having said something. And this is Nixon's reply. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do, but our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals. Whether Nixon was trying to curb his own combative tendencies or appealing to wavering Democrats, his remarks came across as defensive and deferential. So the mistakes that Nixon was making, and again, he was doing a lot of stuff right, it would seem, were about the substance. And the argument here is that that's what may well have tripped him up ultimately. But again, the result was very close. And so, from the same article, what altered the consensus about the first debate from being a draw to being Nixon's ruin? The answer may lie with a search for a post-election explanation for Kennedy's victory. So when Kennedy won narrowly, after that, people tried to figure out why. And it says he squeaked a popular vote win by only 0.2 percentage points, or about 118,000 votes, which is tiny considering the amount of people who did vote. So this is like post-rationalization. That's what this article is suggesting. Nixon didn't win. Oh, it must have been because of that debate. And, Kennedy was tanned. He was younger. Nixon was tired, like pale looking, standing awkwardly, sweating. Must have been that. Or that helped. Historians of the 1960 campaign point out that any of a number of variables could have tipped the outcome in such a close race. And I think that's important to consider. But journalist Theodore H. White, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Making of the President, 1960, argued that televising the first debate had been crucial. So this is somebody arguing that had been crucial, that first debate. And yeah, it goes on here. Until the cameras opened on the senator and the vice president, this is from this book, Kennedy had been the boy under assault and attack by the vice president as immature, young, inexperienced. Now, obviously, in flesh and behaviour, he was the vice president's equal. So it's the opinion of one author. And I think that's fair enough, though. I think that we can see that television allowed Kennedy to, be on the same stage, literally, and they had a debate. And it doesn't look like there was any one overall winner. People's feelings were mixed. So in that sense, he was kind of holding his own. But it wasn't to do with how Nixon looked or Kennedy looked. It was about, in the first instance, according to this author, the fact that they shared the same platform. And Kennedy acquitted himself reasonably well. But ultimately, as I was pointing out earlier, it would also seem that Nixon didn't nail some things in some of those debates as he could have done. Again, we'll go on with this article. Whether television was so revealing and conclusive is arguable. Less debatable is the belief today that television made a difference. As historian David Greenberg has written in that first televised debate, the perception of television's influence went on to transform American politics, shaping the behaviour of leaders and candidates for decades. In other words, the belief, a kind of apocryphal idea that it was how Kennedy looked that made the difference, has transformed, not just in America, across the globe in many countries, that style is so important. And I wouldn't reject the idea that the optics are important, but substance still is. It is of crucial importance to each and every one of us. But because of that idea that Kennedy won because of the way he looked, it has the potential, and I think has already caused this in some instances, for people to look at substance as inferior to style. So it's, for some people, all about style. And it may be to some people's advantage if that's what the populace begin to buy into as well. But I don't think people are stupid. You're not stupid. You're smart. So what can we do? I'm talking about necessarily Trump and Biden. I'm talking about all elections, all leaders, those in business as well. We must be aware of the substance. We must practice critical thinking. We cannot allow ourselves to get bamboozled and enthralled in some sort of trance based on somebody's reputation, how they look, how they sound, and even to a degree how articulate and how good at public speaking they are. Because they may make it sound good, but what is the substance? The substance is key. Again, I'm not dismissing style. Presentation is important, but substance is ultimately more important. We have to pay attention. And we cannot pay attention, and we will get bamboozled and railroaded and swayed and hijacked if we allow our emotions to run away with us. So this is one of these situations where when we're looking at those people in power, we really have to be aware of our own biases. We have to be aware of the priming that is taking place before we get there, and listen, really listen intently to what someone is saying. Yes, how they're saying it, of course, it does count. That's in the mix. That can give us other clues. Is this person truthful? Do we think they're nervous? Is there something else that's going on when they say those words? That's all in the mix of looking, considering, listening critically what is going on. And more and more and more, we need longer debates. We need to be able to question leaders. We need to get longer form answers and less of this short clip and audiences cheering. Now, the fact that I think that the forthcoming Trump and Biden debate isn't, as far as I'm aware, with an audience and there's room to talk, it is great. I don't know who it may favor. Some people think it may favor one candidate over the other. Well, we'll find out. But the winner, that's the population, because we need to understand what the substance is. Whether it's those politicians, the debate that's coming up soon, whether it's other politicians, whether it's business leaders, community leaders, leaders who are, let's say, in NGOs, wherever, we need to be able to question, we need to listen, we need to pay attention, we need to remain calm and not allow emotions to take over. If emotions take over and we fight amongst ourselves, we're dumbed down and pretty easy to, well, have the wool pulled over our eyes. And I suggest that that's not a good thing for you or for me.